In question 5, we ask you just to consider the different stages of life and the different types of temptations that come to you at different times. It helps you to understand the concept of repentance. If you understand there's some temptations you haven't even yet experienced, there's some temptations that will be a far bigger issue for you at a different stage of life. Certainly in the teenage years, the young adult years, there's a huge hormonal thing going on there. That's when your testosterone or your estrogen or all those things are happening in your life. When you're growing up and you're finding your own identity, that's a major pressure at that stage of life. And these things make you particularly vulnerable at that stage of life. Some of the things that the obvious one that comes to mind is the sexual drive. To some extent, a new thing to those who are coming into puberty and find this is a new pressure. But even more than that, we would probably acknowledge that it's more powerful in some ways at that age than at other stages of life. There's an overdose of hormones at that stage in your life, and so the sexual drive is there, the temptation is there. People are all of a sudden maturing around you, and the visual stimulus is greater at that age, and so there's all sorts of temptations toward sexuality that perhaps will lessen as you go on. But that's not the only temptation of that age. The idea of identity is being formed in your mind, in your heart, in your life, and you're trying to work out where you fit, whether you like your parents. Most of us at least go through a stage where we think we don't want to be like our parents in this or that. I'm not sure that actually that was part of my experience, but even in my own family I saw that happening, that little rebellion going on. And so at those stages they throw us into some deep temptations as well. When you're not sure who you are, you're not sure where the boundaries are. Some of us at that age, we move away from home for the first time, so we have more freedom than what we've ever had, and we find ourselves testing use or overuse of alcohol, use or extreme use of drugs. We find ourselves messing with relationships and getting ourselves perhaps into situations that even in our own mind maybe we got in too deep in that one. And so there's some temptations specific to young people. There's also, if I can say this without offending people, there's an immaturity of the brain that accompanies that era of life, and so there's an incapacity to judge circumstances clearly. And so perhaps even in your driving, you really are still learning how fast you need to be driving when you come into this corner. You learn it with experience, and that learning curve can be very dangerous. I'm not saying that driving a car is a sin, but I'm comparing it to so many things in my life. I just don't know where the limits are. I don't know where having a playful joke becomes really hurtful. I don't know where my weaknesses lie, and so I put myself into situations and I take others into situations, whatever sort of circumstance that is. And as you mature, you become a little more cautious, a little more circumspect at times. When you're in a room and there's something going wrong, you're more likely to be aware of it as you mature, because you become alert to those sorts of things and you know yourself better. So there are certainly, probably it's the easy fruit to pick, because we can certainly easily identify with the struggle, the particular sensitivities of being a young person, because most of us have been a young person at some stage. However, there's a whole different array of temptations and opportunities for ungodly behaviour that come to you in your adult years. I'm thinking about those years when perhaps you're getting married, you're certainly partnering up, and you're having children. Not necessarily having children, but having children is one of the great life changes that we go through. When you have children, all of a sudden, whether you've had children by natural birth or whether you've adopted or you've fostered or you've got extended family members, children staying with you, you find that life changes. You find that all of a sudden, in a rather shocking way, you can find yourself not the centre of the universe anymore. You can find yourself there to meet the needs of someone else rather than to satisfy your own desires and pleasures and needs. You find yourself getting up at different times, and I've often thought that I never slept in again for 30 years once we had children. And life is like that once you begin to have your family, even with the husband and wife, and then with the children that follow on afterwards or are connected with that union. So there are some special temptations that come to you through this change, and one of them is fighting down your own desire to look after yourself and stop having to have every hour of every day taken up with looking after someone else. You wait until you're running children to sporting programs and your weekend is not your weekend anymore. You find yourself run ragged. You feel like you're overdoing the work on the weekend, and you're not even getting a break from work through the week. And working through the week has got its own temptations as well. Usually it involves an increased wealth in your relationship. Now, this is not necessarily an immediate problem, of course, but normally you would think that a married couple are likely through the years to become more financially stable, and certainly in a way that they weren't when they were still teenagers. When you're teenagers, most of us are still somewhat beholden to our parents or to some other system, and when we do work, it's already designated. So there's a financial pressure. There's a pressure of caring for yourself, of becoming a servant of others rather than looking after your own desires in life, that come to those who are adults, those who are married. And sometimes that involves marital unfaithfulness. Now, that's not to say when you were a young person you were necessarily faithful in whatever relationships you had, or that you did engage in, you did or you didn't engage in sex before marriage. I'm not delving into that topic. I'm just saying that there is a new dimension of unfaithfulness that comes to those who are married, those who perhaps through some of the pleasure of the sexual relationship diminishing over time in the marriage, and we start looking around somewhere else, or that sense that I'm no longer important in this family, that everything goes towards the children, and so I'm looking for some place where I'm special again. All of those temptations come in. None of those temptations need to be overwhelming, but they can be a new temptation to us, and it's sort of helpful to have some warning that this stuff might come at you. And the idea of excess wealth, of expendable wealth that I can spend on my own pleasures, and so I buy myself, a nicer car, and I go on holidays, and we do things together that we couldn't have done before. Most likely, you're going to find that you're spending more money on coffee or alcohol or whatever it is, whatever your addiction is, at that stage of life, and therein lies a temptation for you. Sometimes drug abuse is part of this equation, and goes not only a temptation for those who are young, teenagers and young adults, but extends and even can begin in the marriage life. Sometimes there's a sense that certainly in some cultures, alcohol consumption becomes more prevalent for those who are married, and especially for the father who wants time away from the wife and the children. Sometimes it's the wife in the home where there's alcohol. Sometimes it's directly related to the workforce, and so there's both husband and wife, perhaps even drinking at different places with different crowds because of their workplace, and there's a serious threat of infidelity infidelity when you have that sort of situation. So the adult years bring particular temptations. And also the later years can bring some particular temptations. I guess I'm more aware of this than what I ever was in another part of my life. There are some things that happen in your later years that bring you to a new experience of temptation, and some of those things are around entitlement, the sense that I've earned, I should be treated differently. I should be treated with more respect because I've earned it. Even entitlement in the presence of God. God, I've been faithfully doing this stuff for 20 years. Where are you? Why aren't you helping me? Why aren't you looking after me? There can be more wealth available. Certainly in retirement years, there's something to think about there. How do you use any extra wealth? Now, not always, of course. For some people, retirement is a very difficult time, maybe more difficult than the teenage years. So there are different temptations: pride and self-righteousness. There can be that expectation that I have to set the bar, set the standard even in the local church. So there are different temptations. Probably different cultures are going to approach that subject differently as well. So it's helpful for you to think about it. It's helpful if you've got some people from different generations in your discussion who can say to you, oh, you don't understand, that never goes away. That's always there, or whatever it is. But throughout your life, you're in a process of examining yourself and saying, search me, O God, and know my thoughts. See if there be some wicked way in me. Show me where I need to be in submission to you. Because repentance is a lifetime work. But the victory is available when we have the Spirit of God. We don't have to be bound to it. And this is what I've said when I've talked about this particular temptations of older people. The temptations of older people toward pride and self-righteousness and self entitlement can be very strong. But you should have learned a lot of lessons by that time in your life. You should have learned how straightforward and beautiful it is to bend your knee and say, Lord, have mercy on me. Lord, help me. I'm weak in this area. Please help me with this. And perhaps you've even learned how to apologize to people properly by that stage in your life. So it can be a time of increasing liberty as you are able to take possession of the attributes that God gives us.